About 100 miles west of Hanzhong Prefecture, there is a place called Dehua Village, which is under the jurisdiction of Fengxian County. Slightly swaying in the wind. If the weather is good, the river will be lush with all kinds of weeds. But in a drought year, the river will become a very shallow stream. When the drought is severe, the whole river will be dry, and the grass along the river will be left with some drought resistance. The east end of Dehua village is flat and open, and the people living here are all well-to-do families in the village. The adobe houses built along the gables at the west end of the village are much stronger. The east end of the village is higher than the west end of the village, and there is a steep in the middle. Down the slope, next to the gables, the adobe houses are housed, and the outside is all more tattered adobe or even just a wood fence. In the westernmost part of the village, there is a family, an old man surnamed Lu, 4 sons and 3 daughters. During the slack season in June, the old man Liu's family held a happy event for the third son, and in October the farmers were busy after marrying a second daughter again. Now there are only the youngest son and little girl left in the family. On the adobe wall of Lu Laohan's house, there are still used red characters remaining, indicating that this family has just held a happy event. Lu Shuer came out of the courtyard with her short legs and walked east along the dirt road. A woman in her 20s shouted, "Don't run away." "Oh." Willow Catkins agreed and continued to walk forward. After walking for more than a minute with her short legs, the big in the village that divides the rich and the poor appeared in front of her eyes. Stopped and looked at it, then took a deep breath and tried to climb up. "Before I walked halfway, I was already exhausted and out of breath." One of them didn't pay attention, his feet slipped, and the whole person almost rolled down the slope. "Sister!" With an exclamation, Lu Shuer's right arm was grabbed, her whole body was slanted, there was a slight pain in her right arm, and her left arm was also grabbed, so the body is balanced, and the pain naturally disappears. "What are you doing? You've come this far. Look, you almost fell? What do you do when you get off the ground?" The one on the left has a loyal face and a smile. "Sister, did your mother ask you to come to us? It's time for dinner? Dad is back." Lu Shuer shook her head, and sure enough she saw a disappointed expression on the face of the second brother Lu Linzonghao, while the elder brother Lu Shu on the right was still nervously looking up and down to see if she was injured. Seeing nothing, he took her hand and walked down the carefully. Lu Shuer struggled a little. "I'm going up to find Shishan." "Why are you looking for him?" Willow asked, still pulling her to the flat road down the slope, leaving that was very dangerous for the 5-year-old Catkins. "My eldest brother and I saw Shishan and his father go out in a car in the morning, so the big mule pulling the car may have gone to the county." 7-year-old Lu Lin gestured with his hands. The big mule then hurriedly grabbed Lu Shuer's hand again. "Hey!" The willow tree is also 7 years old, only a moment earlier than Lu Lin, but her temperament is much more stable. The hand holding Lu Shuer never loosened. She nodded and said, "Shishan was with him yesterday." I said, "I'm going to the county today, what do you have to do with him?" "I'll tell him to go tomorrow." Lu Shuer heard that Shishan had gone to the county. She couldn't help but feel depressed. She lowered her head and muttered, "It's nothing, I just want to see his cows." "Sister, do you want to see his cows? I'll show you tomorrow." Lu Lin danced with excitement as soon as he heard it, as if he wanted to go right now. The willow tree also nodded. "Tomorrow, my brother will take you to see it, you can't come out alone." Lu Shuer obediently agreed, and the two of them held their hands and walked back, but she was slandering her eldest brother in her heart. How can she be so long-winded at such a young age? The 3 brothers and sisters went home, and far away they saw a young woman in her 20s standing at the door looking over here. He breathed a sigh of relief, and Lu Lin had already shouted from afar, "Mother!" He nodded and complained to Lu Shuer in the middle, "I thought you were at the door, why did you run away?" "Mother, you don't know, my brother and I met my sister on the slope, and she almost rolled down the slope," Lu Lin said immediately. Lu Shuer pouted and looked up at the second brother who loves to complain. He turned pale and grabbed Lu Shuer's arm. Why are you disobedient? How many times have I told you, you can't go up Napo? Said he looked at her up and down, and to see that she was all right, he brushed off the front of her clothes. Mother, it's all right, my sister is walking carefully. The eldest Liasha defended Liuk Zhuir. I went to see Liulan in the morning, the wheat field is all cleaned up, and I can be there in the future. I'm looking at my brothers and sisters at home. He sighed, that's only half a month, and then it's time for a busy year. Then she turned to look at Lu Shuer, when will you grow up? The last sentence is about Lu Shuer. Lu Shuer hurriedly said, Mother, I have grown up, and now I can look at my brother. After saying that, Mr. He got up and entered the yard. Hearing Lu Shuer's sentence, he turned his head and smiled at her. Lu Lin ran into the courtyard and plunged into the kitchen, while Lu Shu kept holding her hand and entered the first room on the west side, their room. On the Kong sleeps a little boy who is only 1 year old, Lu Sen, Lu Shuer's younger brother, with bricks and pillows on the edge of the Kong, for fear that he will wake up and roll over from the edge of the Kong. Suer, my brother may be waking up soon, you go up to the Kong to watch him, and when you wake up, call your mother, do you know? He took off his shoes and said. Lu Shuer agreed, and Willow went out. Lu Shuer turned to look at Lu Sen, who was sleeping soundly on the bed. Just as he was about to use a handkerchief to wipe the hala that came out from the corner of his mouth, he heard a loud voice from outside the courtyard, is there anyone at home? Liu's family? Lu Gao's. In the countryside, few people call other women like this. When Lu Shuer hears grandma like this, she immediately knows that something is wrong. He hurriedly climbed down from the Kong, pulled his shoes and ran to the door of the room. Sure enough, he saw a woman in her 50s standing in the courtyard, shouting to the upper room with her hips on her back. Lu Shuer immediately sat on the threshold, with a pair of chubby hands supporting her cheeks and tilting her head to watch the fun. 4 or 5 people shouted out in one voice, he came out of the kitchen, Lu Shuer's Aunt Ma came out of their house, Lu Shuer's grandmother Lu Gao also came out of her room. When he came out of the room, he frowned and looked at the people in the courtyard, Wang family, what are you making a fuss about? The mother-in-law of the Wang family crossed her waist and shouted, my apricot tree has been stolen again. It must be picked by your baby. Say. Did you two pick it? Just as Lu Shu and Lu Lin came out of the kitchen, the mother-in-law of the Wang family immediately pointed and asked. Lu Lin jumped 3 feet high and shouted, don't talk nonsense. Who cares about your sour apricots? When Mrs. He heard what Mrs. Wang could not help saying, she wronged her baby, and she was also very unhappy. Aunt Wang, you must have evidence for what you say, why do you say that my baby picked your apricots? There is no evidence. Why do you with red mouth and white teeth wrong people? It was picked by your baby. No one's baby was around this morning, but your baby was at home. Who were they? Lu Lin's direction was chaotic. You know he's not there? My 2 grandsons were called to the wheat field in the morning to clean up, and they just came back. The voice was still calm. Wang's mother-in-law jumped up and shouted, I just saw your willow tree taking his younger brother and sister to pass under my apricot tree. I followed and came out to see the big apricots that were still hanging yesterday. It's gone. Didn't they steal whoever stole it? Lu Gao's voice became louder, looking at the mother-in-law of the Wang family sternly. Lu Shuer, who was watching the fun, wished she could clap to her grandmother for encouragement and encouragement. As expected of someone who knew words, what she said was really different. That's right, Grandma Lu Shuer is very different from other country women. Her grandma knew the characters, and the names of the children in the family told outsiders that grandpa took them. In fact, everyone in the family knew that they were all taken by grandma. Lu Shuer is more satisfied with her name, which is better than those in the village called Dehua and Qiwa. However, the Wang family's in-laws and Lu Gao's family have been neighbors for half their lives. She knew that she could speak for a long time, and she came prepared. It's not easy to figure it out. Just ask me to go in and do a search, he said, wiping his arms and rolling up his sleeves, and ran to the kitchen. The catkin suddenly realized. After making such a fuss, it turned out to be because you wanted to see your own kitchen? Yesterday was the day when the second aunt returned home. What did you bring with you, the greedy wife of the Wang family? Lu Shuer tilted her head and thought. The willow tree jumped out from the side, stretched out her hand to block the kitchen door. You are not from the government, why are you rummaging in people's homes? He hurriedly ran over to block the willow tree behind him. Lu Gao also sneered at the mother-in-law of the Wang family. My grandson is right, why do you search my house if you don't have any evidence? Are you the Yamen arrestor or the county magistrate? There is no evidence. Flip through my house, is there still Wang Fa? If you dare to try it, I will go to Lichhan Pingalai. Tisk tisk tisk. Look at your great energy, I just went to Lichhan for a few apricots, and Lichhan ignored you. Lu Gao snorted coldly, Xingzi is a small matter, and framed is a big matter. If you don't understand, anyone can rush to my courtyard, and the red mouth and white teeth say that I stole something, you can search my home. So what is it? My home is so easy to search. The mother-in-law of the Wang family couldn't quarrel with Lu Gao, she glanced at the kitchen with her eyes and feet jumping, but couldn't see anything. Strongly, I don't want to be searched if I'm guilty. I think it's your baby who stole it. Bah! I'll treat it like a dog. Lu Lin shouted, no way. Your apricots are eaten by dogs. The apricot tree at the gate of Wang's house, since it bears fruit, Mrs. Wang is watching closely, who can steal it? All are eaten by their own people. When Lu Lin said this, it clearly meant that everyone in their family was a dog. Lu Shuer was sitting at the door, laughing hey hey, the mother-in-law Wang did not know that she was scolded by Lu Lin, she pointed her finger at Lu Lin as she walked out, and nodded at Lu Shuer who was laughing here he scolded, two short-lived little brats. One day they will fall into my hands, let's see how I clean up you. Lu Shuer loudly replied, you are short-lived. Your whole family is short-lived. When Mrs. He saw Mrs. Wang scolding her child, she quit, she chased after 2 steps and scolded, you are also over 50, don't be ashamed. You dare to touch my baby, come on, I'll come to the door with a kitchen knife. If you don't believe me, try it. Finally, the wife of the Wang family, who was looking for trouble, was scolded by the Lu family just like in many previous battles. The mother-in-law of the Wang family just walked away, just leaning on the door frame of her own house and watching the fun while nibbling on melon seeds. Mrs. Ma finally spoke, lukewarm, my baby is not good enough, it's just that there are too many things to do. But in the end, the mouth is very strong, look at this one by one. He turned to look at her, sister-in-law, what did you say? Ma Shippy spit out a melon seed shell with a smile, took 2 steps out and said loudly, I said, my baby is not good enough, and there are so many things that happen all day. Don't let me say it. Why doesn't the aunt of the Wang family look for others, but always look for our family? Mrs. He is not polite to the mother-in-law of the Wang family, because she is an outsider, but she can't be too disrespectful to her sister-in-law. Her face turned pale, but she couldn't argue with her in front of the child. Lu Gao patted the soil on his body, then glanced at Ma and said, it's all right, don't blame Sang and scold Huai here, who doesn't know that Mrs. Wang is a scourge, living in the next door is staring at our house all day long? You have quarreled with her a lot? You can laugh at others without your business today? My family doesn't know how to harmonize with my family, he said, turning around and going in, he said the last sentence, it's a nest all day long. Ma's face changed all of a sudden, his mouth moved a few times, but he didn't dare to speak back. Mrs. He said, the second one's family, do you know that her second aunt went back to the door to secretly stuff something for her mother yesterday? If Mrs. Wang came to make a quarrel, Doesn't she have pink eye? He really can't stand her like this. She still mocked herself in front of her, and in a blink of an eye, she talked to herself like no one, as if she was a wooden man with no temperament. She could treat her whatever she wanted, they will continue to be the same. Mr. He didn't even look at Mrs. Ma, and called out to the upper house window, "Mother, I cleaned up the kitchen," and the willow tree also carried the chopped firewood to the kitchen, then the kitchen will be handed over to the third siblings. Then he brushed off his body, and greeted Lu Shu and Lu Lin who were still outside to return to his room. Lu Shuer also got up and followed into the room. Lao Liu's family now has 3 daughters-in-law. After the 3 daughters-in-law entered the house, Lu Gao assigned them to cook. People cook for 10 days. Lu Shuer's mother, Mrs. He, is the second daughter-in-law. Yesterday, she was full in 10 days, but since yesterday morning, the third uncle has said that the third aunt is not feeling well. She had no choice but to make lunch. Rural people generally eat 2 meals, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. Only eat 3 meals during busy farming days. Lu Shuer entered the house and was hugged by the willow tree on the Kong. She looked at he and said, "Mother, do you think the third aunt will pretend to be sick again?" He immediately gave her a sideways look. "You're fine. If you don't grow tall, you'll have a heart." A little guy who's not as tall as chopsticks, always thinking about these things. Lu Shuer immediately stomped her neck and said, "Isn't that because the third aunt always pretends to be sick and lazy? The big aunt does not suffer from life and death, and the third aunt's work is all done by you." Lu Lin also followed, "That's right. He said he was ill when the farming was busy, and even the third uncle didn't work for several days." Although he knew that the children were telling the truth, but she couldn't allow her children to be no big or small, talking about the elders behind her back, so she sullenly said, "The elders are not about you." "What should I say, do you know? What is filial piety?" According to the words passed down from the ancestors, those who do not speak filial piety will never be able to raise their heads all their lives, and everyone will look down on them. You can't be such a person, you know. Lu Shuer still wanted to defend a few words, but seeing his wide eyes, she could only lower her head together with Lu Lin. The willow tree never said a word. Seeing that her younger brother and sister were all wilted, she quickly said, "Mom, wait for Dad to come back and see what work I can find. If the little baby can do it, I will go too, even if you can only earn a penny, it's still money. Just ask Lu Lin to watch his younger brother and sister at home." He shook her head, "You are only 7 years old, what can you do? It's better to stay at home. If you can spare half a month, clean up the house." She said here, but he thought about something and came up with something, and he muttered to himself, "I have to quickly make shoes and pants, and my toes and legs and wrists are exposed." Lu Lin sneered, "Mother, you asked my brother to make shoes and pants." Lu Shuer laughed out loud. Lu Shu also scratched his head with a smile. She also burst into laughter, reached out and nodded on Lu Lin's forehead, "You are the only one." The willow forest and the willow tree also climbed up the Kong. The willow tree tilted his head and looked at Lu Sen, who was still asleep for a while, and said strangely, "I slept well today, I usually wake up early." "Brother, have you seen Shishan's cows?" Lu Shuer was still thinking about this, and asked, "Do you know how much money a cow costs?" "I don't know, there must be a lot." Willow shook his head. In fact, when she asked, she already knew that a cow in modern times would cost 7 or 8,000. In this era, at least, how much money is needed, Lu Shuer doesn't know, because she still doesn't know how to convert it into silver. Actually, Lu Shuer, who is 5 years old, has never seen what the whole silver looks like. It's different from what I've seen on TV before. The Lu family is a very poor family, although the grandparents are very diligent, but unfortunately the family has a large population, 4 sons and 3 daughters, it is not easy to pull one by one, so don't I want to save money. Since the eldest of the Lu family got married, the family has become even poorer. Almost every time you marry a daughter-in-law, you have to marry a daughter-in-law to maintain the family. The eldest, Lu Changqi, was married to the Ma family. It doesn't hurt to do anything. Country people are not used to this kind of care about everything, so Ma's family was not easy to find when he was in her family's family, so she had to settle for the poor Lu family. The second eldest, Lu Chonggang, married the He family, and it was rumored that he had a bad temper and was too short-tempered when he was in her parents' home. But when it comes to this, Lu Shui'er can't help laughing. She is very satisfied with this mother in her life. If the mother is not strong, how can she protect herself and her brothers and sisters? Her father, Lu Chonggang, is the second child in the family. He is neither the eldest nor the young child. The second child in the middle suffers the most. Besides, this is the second most contentious issue at home, and the family is not so contentious. But if you don't have a temper outside, the shrew in the village who loves to find trouble, everyone will pinch you when they see you. How can you bear it? Just like the mother-in-law of the Wang family who had just arrived from their neighbors. Delicious and lazy to the point of outrageous. It seems right now, it's been 4 months since I got married, and I only cooked for less than 5 days. It hurts here or there all day long. If I don't talk about being lazy, I have to involve Lu Chengui. The first half of the month was a busy time for the harvest of buckwheat. The whole family was so busy that they could shed a layer of skin. It became a small black briquettes, only the third daughter-in-law hid in the house and could not come out. Lu Gao went out to call once, pulled it off the Kong, scolded and screamed and went to the ground for 1 day, and the next day he crawled. She couldn't afford to sit on the bed anymore. She said that she shrank her waist and twisted her feet, and she couldn't move. The strong laborer named Lu Chengui served her for 3 days. When Lu Gao saw the third daughter-in-law being so lazy, her heart was cold. Speaking of which, who in the countryside doesn't want to marry a daughter-in-law who is capable of right and wrong? Of course Lu Gao also hoped that all his daughters-in-law would be good, willing to work outside, less right and wrong, good-natured at home, and harmonious with his sister-in-law. But the family is poor. Although the dowry of the girl with a good reputation may not be more than other girls, but the girl with a certain bad reputation in her family's village will definitely pay less than other girls. Their family is poor, and they can only marry those girls who have a little bad reputation, but it is not a big problem. Especially the second daughter-in-law, in addition to being a bit more temperamental, she is really a good daughter-in-law. She works diligently, and knows how to be filial to her parents. Those who suffer and endure, unless her child is involved, that explosive temper will break out. Although the eldest daughter-in-law is too fussy, her work is not ambiguous. The third daughter-in-law, Jie, is considered to be the best in this country. Does she really consider herself the life of a city lady? Lu Shui'er was still pondering on the Kong when she heard footsteps walking past the door. She immediately went over and leaned by the window to look out, and sure enough, she saw her grandmother walking towards the house of the third uncle and third aunt. Lu Lin also came over and said in a low voice, "Is your mother going to call the third aunt?" Lu Shui'er nodded, "Yes, but she can't get up." Lu Gao walked under the window of the third child and shouted in, "The third child? Still not up? It's time for you to cook today." After a while, a weak voice came from the room, "Yes, I'll go." The end sound even trembled like a hukin, as if it was the sick one is about to die. A promise is a promise, but it used to be the same. After a while, he asked his man to discuss with his mother-in-law and plead for mercy. Lu Gao obviously didn't believe her anymore, so she reached out and patted the window twice, "Then come out quickly. Hurry up, I'll be waiting here." There was no movement in the room. Sure enough, after a while, Lu Chengui came out and whispered with a smile, "Mother, Xiaojin's body." Before he finished speaking, Lu Gao's face was interrupted, "Stop talking nonsense. Tell your daughter-in-law to get up and cook. My country family can't afford such a daughter. If I stay like this, let's go to Jia's house and talk." I can't afford such a daughter-in-law. Mother! You can't be unreasonable. Who are you saying is unreasonable? Lu Gao's face turned red with anger, and his tone increased several times. No matter how good-tempered a person is, he can't stand his son talking about him like this. He, who was just carrying a pot of clothes and was going to wash by the river, saw that the third son and Lu Gao were arguing, so he put down the pot and came over to Lu Chengui and said, "The third son, what are you doing with your mother? How can you talk like this? Who is being unreasonable? Has your daughter-in-law been washed once for a few months after entering the house? How many meals have you cooked for the family? Unreasonable." Lu Chengui glanced at her and said, "I'm talking to my mother, it's none of your business." Lu Gao raised her voice and shouted, "How did you talk to your second sister-in-law? You got married, but you are living more and more back." Lu Chengui was yelled at by Lu Gao, and he felt wronged and shrank his neck. At this moment, a thin voice came from the room, "Don't threaten me, who's afraid? Just say it. I only asked people to work for a few days after I entered the door. It's really sick, who's not calling me? Keeping? But our family is hard-hearted, forcibly pulling the patient off the Kong to work. Now that he is cured, the disease is more serious, but we still have to ask people to cook. I want to kill people for advice." Grind. When Lu Gao heard Jia's nonsense with his eyes open, his whole body trembled with anger, and he pointed at the window with his fingers in anger. "If you want to say it, then say it well. How many days did you enter the door to ask you to work? The parents who got married on June 1st, the door back on June 4th, and the aunt's day on June 6th, said that he was going to come back directly after aunt's day there, and lived from June 4th to June 10th. Whose daughter-in-law can stay at her parents' house for 6 days after returning home for 3 days? This is surprising. It's up." He didn't change his breath, he even said like a firecracker, "It's not too bad, I arrived home on the evening of June 10th, and I started planting autumn wheat on June 12th, and the whole family went to the ground. Only you said that you were a thin-skinned person who just entered the door, and it was difficult to go out, and I agreed. I am not satisfied with this." Lu Chengui had an impatient look on his face. After listening to Lu Gao's long talk, he interrupted and called out, "It's okay, mother." Lu Gao was interrupted by his son halfway through his speech, and he was even more angry, and his voice became louder, "If you don't go down, you can always cook, right? My daughter-in-law gave you a fight, but what did you say? You said that you didn't cook at your parents' house, but you wouldn't. At that time, harvesting wheat was so busy, I didn't have time to talk to you, but you're good, ask the 9-year-old Xiener to cook, you are lying in bed all day long as the third aunt waiting to eat." Lu Gao pointed to the second child's house, "Suer is only 5 years old, she has to go to the field every day to bring food and water to everyone, what are you doing? Nothing, do it. Sleep on the Kong every day. In the first 2 months after you got married, you didn't do any work. Why are you so arrogant, saying that you worked in a few days after entering the house? Mother! Stop talking." Lu Gao turned his face to Lu Chengui and scolded, "And you? When you didn't marry this lazy woman, you were still like a person. If you marry a lazy woman, you also become precious? You are too lazy. The field work is over, and there are still 2 months before the Chinese New Year. Your 2 older brothers and 1 younger brother know to go out to find work, but you are squatting in the room and serving your daughter-in-law. Are you still alone?" Lu Chengui clenched her neck and wanted to talk back, but when she saw the old lady trembling all over her body, her feet staggered, and the second sister-in-law couldn't hold it, she was obviously angry, but she didn't dare to say more. The Jiashi in the room choked softly, "Come on, scold well, your son is not human, and I don't know if he was born." Lu Gao was furious and slapped the window hard, "Come out! Come out for me! Whose family's rule is this? Mother-in-law is talking outside, and daughter-in-law is quarreling in the house. Seeing this, Lu Chengui stomped his feet anxiously. Okay, stop arguing. Let people hear the joke. He turned around and entered the door, slammed the door from the inside, and couldn't come out. Lu Gao was so angry that he almost fell on his back, but fortunately, he didn't fall down with his support, and he scolded 2 more words, but the room didn't reply, but he didn't open the door and didn't come out. Lu Gao was so angry that he couldn't do anything, and he helped him back to the upper room while persuading him. Lu Shuer and Lu Lin, who have been watching the lively here, glanced at each other and pouted, and Lu Shuer said, Aunt San is too lazy. Lu Lin also nodded, Aunt San is a lazy woman. If I usually hear the 2 of them talking about their elders behind their backs like this, Lu Shu, the elder brother, should discipline them, but Lu Shu has also heard and seen the scene just now, and I feel that the 3rd aunt is too much. It's ridiculous, he is not upright himself, arguing with grandma through the window, how can this be what an elder should be like? Therefore, when the 2 of them said this to the 3rd aunt, Lu Shu did not speak. The willow hurriedly hugged him, and coaxed him to the bottom of the Kong to lead him to pee, came back to wash his hands and face, and was busy feeding him water. He persuaded Mrs. Lu Gao in the upper house for a while, and then went to the river to wash with a basin of clothes. This was also to avoid the cooking time in the next afternoon. Letting go, he just refused to come out to cook. When it was time to cook, he had to cook, and he couldn't always give her trouble, so she just went out and came back after the meal time. Instructed Willow, and he went out. When Lu Gao was quarreling with his 3rd daughter-in-law Jie, Ma had been hiding in the room and did not come out. At this time, he heard that it was quiet outside, and he also went out with his clothes on. She just came out and went into Lu Gao's house. Lu Lin, who was still lying on the window, immediately whispered to Lu Shuer, Auntie must be going to tell right and wrong. Lu Shuer has not had time to nod her head. Lu Lin has already said, I'll listen. Saying that, like a monkey, he got down from the Kong, and ran out to the window of the upper room. Squat! Lu Shuer was looking funny here, of course she also thought of it, she must have gone to provoke Ma's divisiveness, stepping down on highs. That Jia family was a little better, and although Ma hated her for being lazy, she never quarreled in front of Jia's face, and only secretly made trouble with Lu Gao's family. And his mother He's family was even poorer than Liu's. Ma was never polite to He, and often acted like a sister-in-law to scolded him in person. He was even more disrespectful to the children of the 2nd family. Hit and scold. Lu Shuer especially hates Ma Shi. When she was 2 years old, she was slapped by Ma Shi, or secretly beat her father and mother behind her back. Her parents, otherwise they will beat her, hang up and beat her. If it were a 2-year-old child, she would definitely be frightened by her. But Lu Shuer was not at all. When he came back, he told Mr. He. Mr. He took the kitchen knife and went desperately to find Mrs. Ma. If Lu Chonggeng and brother Lu Changqi were not in the middle, Mrs. He's kitchen knife would have been able to cut in on Ma's body. Since then, Ma Shi has been a little more honest. Suddenly someone shouted at the gate of the courtyard, Is there anyone? Is there anyone at home? Lu Shuer looked up and saw a big boy of 12 or 13 standing at the door, stretching his neck to look into the courtyard. When he shouted, he first startled Lu Lin, who was squatting under Grandma's window and eavesdropped on it. Lu Lin ran back in a hurry, and when he got on the Kong, he said to Lu Suer, the aunt is really going to tell the truth. The 3rd aunt can't be so lazy. She's not doing it anymore. It's so funny. Why didn't you say this when you just quarreled? After saying that, I climbed up on the Kong and came over to lie on the window and look out. Who is that? Lu Shuer asked. Lu Lin shook his head, I don't know. He turned his head and called out, Brother, there is someone at the door. Lu Shu was busy putting on a cotton jacket for Lu Sen. When she heard the words, she subconsciously just said oh. Lu Gao and Ma had heard the movement and came out of the room. Ma was still asking, who are you? Lu Gao recognized it. Oh, is this my brother-in-law? The boy walked in with a smile and bowed to Lu Gao. Hello, my aunt, my mother asked me to come to my second sister, my uncle came back, and asked her to go back. Before he finished speaking, Lu Chengui, who finally heard the voice of the boy outside, came out, glanced at it and said, oh, it's Xiaoli. He turned his head and shouted into the room, Xiao Zhen, it's Xiaoli. Lu Shuer, who was lying on the window watching the fun, only saw Jiaxi, who was still in the house, and ran out like a gust of wind, and the threshold actually jumped over. It didn't look like he was sick at all, so he came out and pulled the boy and called out, Xiao Li, who did you just say is back? Lu Gao and Ma saw Jia who jumped out alive, and their faces were all black. People who were born with eyes came to the village, followed by a few children watching the fun at the gate of the courtyard. They first greeted each other in the courtyard, and a few adults who passed by stopped and looked into the courtyard. Lu Shuer glanced at the door of the courtyard, and saw that the wife of the Wang family next door was also among them, looking at her home curiously. In the courtyard, Jia Xiaoli was pulled by his second sister, and he hurriedly smiled and said, Second sister, it's the little uncle who is back. Jia's surprise was an octave high. What? Little uncle? The little uncle who went to sea? What's going on? Jia Xiaoli couldn't tell even half of his eldest son. He scratched his head and said, I just came back, what else can I do? My parents told you to go back and see you, and my uncle is here. Married a little aunt outside. Jia opened her mouth wide in surprise, seeing that she was not mentally prepared at all. Lu Chengui hurriedly said, let's go into the room, go in and talk. Lu Gao also nodded, yes, come into the room and talk, take a break. Then he said to Lu Chengui, pour water for your brother-in-law. After speaking, he turned back to the room. Now, Jia Xiaoli is a junior, so it is inappropriate for her to be polite here. Jia Xiaoli smiled and hurriedly said to Lu Gao, thank you, auntie. Turning his head, he whispered to Lu Chengui who was pulling him, but my parents told me to go back today, if you go back, try to hurry back today. Jia was still a little unable to recover, and nodded, isn't it? It's been out for more than 10 years, and I haven't heard from it. A few years ago, someone from a nearby village told my parents. In a word, I said that I saw my uncle when I went to sea, but I haven't heard from him all the time. Speaking of which, I hurriedly asked Jia Xiaoli, why did the little uncle come back? Who is the little aunt? Look at them. How are they? When asked about this, Jia Xiaoli was very excited, and said, second sister, you don't know. The little uncle is rich now. He came back in the big carriage with his beautiful little aunt. She was dressed in silk and satin clothes, and the clothes were so beautiful. There were more than a dozen people serving behind them. At first glance, they were not from the countryside, and, speaking of this, Jia Xiaoli inadvertently saw that Ma Shi, who had not left, was staring at him with wide eyes, so he was a little embarrassed, and his voice was a little lower, but he was still very excited. Anyway, it is but now that I have money. My aunt is wearing gold and jade on her head. She took a box, I glanced at it, and it was all silver. Oh, shut up! Jiaxi suddenly said nervously, and glanced at Ma Shi, who was stunned beside him. Ma was not conscious at all, and didn't care that Jia looked at him like a thief now, surprised and envious, and hurriedly leaned up and asked Jia Xiaoli, did you really see a box of silver? Oh my mother! How much is that? Your family is rich now. It's richer than the people in the city. Jiaxi originally wanted to quickly drag Jia Xiaoli into the room and whisper, but was about to stretch out his hand but stopped, and immediately thought of a way to improve his status in this family, and immediately changed his mind. The voice became a little louder and asked, what are you saying? The little uncle is really rich and he brought a lot of things back to our family. Jiaziali had just been reprimanded by her, and was so frightened that she hurriedly shut her mouth, but hearing her question now, she couldn't tell whether the second sister meant to tell him or not to tell him, hesitated for a moment and nodded, and his voice was not too loud, "Yeah, anyway, you brought a lot of things. Second sister, can you quickly pack up and go back? Jia certainly can't wait for a moment." Busy agreed and turned to go back to the house, and then remembered something to ask, "Xiao Li, when did the little uncle come back?" "Back yesterday." Jia's tone suddenly increased by an octave, obviously deliberately asking, "I came back yesterday, why did you call me today?" Lu Chengui also saw that he was famous, and hurriedly stretched out his hand to pull her, smiling with him, "It must have just come back, everyone in the family is busy, and there is no time. Don't say anything else, hurry up and pack up, go back and have a look." Just then Mrs. Jia hummed, and then shouted at Lu Gao's window, "Mother! You heard that too, the little uncle of her family is back and told me to go back. Then me and Chengui, go back and have a look." "I didn't even go to Lu Gao's house, I just shouted in the courtyard and went back to my house." Lu Gao's house was silent, Lu Chengui hurriedly followed into the house, and the two came out immediately, each holding a package. Lu Chengui shouted at Lu Gao's window again, "Mother, then let's go." "It's gone." The Jias locked the door of their own house behind. "Auntie, let's go." Jiaziali was still a little polite and said, and then he left with his sister and brother-in-law. The people at the gate of the courtyard have already started talking. "Is there really a box of silver? My mother, I have never seen." "You have seen a box, have you seen a piece of silver?" "No. I haven't seen half of it, and I still have one. Oh, how much is that? This old Lu family's third daughter-in-law is making a fortune. Is this true or false? The little boy is talking nonsense, how can there be so much money in the world?" In the midst of everyone's admiration and discussion, Mr. Jia walked over from the way everyone let out with his head held high, and Lu Chengui smiled and kept holding the hand of his brother-in-law Jiaziali. They have been gone for a long time, and Ma Shi, who opened his mouth in the courtyard, reacted in a trance, and hurriedly walked to the courtyard door, wanting to go out to find a good relationship, and he also likes to gossip about others, the mother-in-law said, who would have heard Lu Gao shouting from the back as soon as he walked to the door, "Don't go out. This is not cooking, and you want to call your father back to scold people." Mr. Ma turned her head in surprise when she heard the words, "Mother. It's not my turn to cook today, it's time for the third sibling to cook. Where did everyone go? It's my sister-in-law's turn, why did you ask me to cook?" Ma Shishao said with a neck. "Your sister-in-law goes to the city with the car to sell insole eggs, and you can only come back at night, you don't know. You don't want to cook, do you ask me to do it? Or do you want to wait for your father-in-law to come back without food? Eating and scolding people. Hurry up and cook. Otherwise, you can go to the river to wash your clothes and replace your second siblings to cook." Lu Gao came out and stood at the door with a face as heavy as pig iron. Today, the third daughter-in-law is clearly giving her a slap in the face. This is the daughter-in-law who in turn gives her mother-in-law a slap in the face. How could Lu Gao's family bear it? The eldest daughter-in-law is still here to make a meal with her, so how can she give her a good look? Ma Shi stood at the gate of the courtyard and hesitated for a long time, choosing in his heart whether to cook or wash clothes to save trouble, and finally felt that cooking would save trouble, and he could wait until he finished washing his clothes. "Come back to help her, but if you go to the laundry, you can only come back after washing it by yourself." Muttering and scolding, "Lazy woman! Let's see how lazy you are!" Angrily cursing and going to the kitchen, "I have forgotten now, I have just when I heard that rich relatives came to the Jia family, I planned to go up, but I only knew that I had suffered a big loss. It's all that lazy Jia Shi." Lu Shu only put on Lu Sen's clothes at this moment, and then he leaned over to the window to take a look, and saw that there was no one in the courtyard, and the villagers who were watching the lively outside the courtyard also left. Even if he didn't watch it just now, he could hear it clearly, so he said to Lu Suer and Lu Lin, "Okay, don't watch, you two are watching Lu Sen at home, I'll go to my mother." Lu Lin scratched his head, "Brother, Milk said that you are a boy, you are not allowed to help your mother cook and wash clothes." Lu Shuer immediately gave Lu Lin a blank look. Lu Shu smiled and said to Lu Lin, "If you don't tell me, who knows? My mother lives so much all day, so I can help me if I can." Then he went out. Lu Lin listened for a while, then suddenly became sensible, and said to Lu Shuer, "Sister, close the window, it will be cold in the second half, and I will be sick." Said he rubbed off the Kong and closed the door. When Lu Sen woke up, he immediately picked up a few small stones placed on the Kong head and played with him. He didn't have any toys, so Lu Shu went out to find a few strangely shaped stones and washed them by the river. Lu Sen still liked it when he brought it back as a toy. At this moment, the stones are divided into two according to their own ideas. Xiao Liason also looks up at her sister from time to time. When she sees Lu Shuer, she grins at her. Laugh. Lu Shuer leaned over and smiled and snatched the stone from Lu Sen's hand and deliberately hid it behind her. Lu Sen looked up at her with dark eyes, as if thinking that her sister was playing with herself or really grab your own stone. After a while, I felt that I should grab it back no matter what, so I staggered up and rushed towards Lu Shuer, shouting, "Sister, give it back to Sensei, give it back to Sensei." Lu Shuer was also taken aback by his actions. For fear of hitting the Kong and hurting, she hurriedly opened her hand to pick him up, but forgot that she was also a 5-year-old child. Lu Senja it slammed into her arms firmly, knocking her into a circle on the Kong. Lu Sen felt amused and laughed giggling. Lu Shuer also smiled, and pointed at the tip of his little nose, "It hurts to death. You are still laughing." Lu Sen even rolled on the Kong with laughter, stood up again and wanted to do it again. Lu Shuer looked at his naive preparation and praised him, and cried out in fright, "Hey yo no! I can't catch you!" Before he finished speaking, Lu Sen bumped over like a calf, and Lu Shuer opened his hand to catch it, and rolled twice until the wall stopped it, and his ribs were hurting. Lu Sen still felt amused, rolled on the Kong and laughed, got up after laughing enough and continued to play. The sister and brother laughed for a while, then they heard movement outside, the footsteps were different. "Dengdenden," Lu Lin shouted, "Dad is back!" and ran away. "Go out!" Lu Shuer also hurriedly climbed down from the Kong. When she was climbing down, Xiao Liason thought that her brother and sister were going to put herself down, and hurriedly shouted, "Dad, Daddy! Me too, go! Sister, hug Moriko, hug Moriko!" He waited by the Kong with his hands open. Lu Shuer was afraid that he would fall off again in a hurry, so she quickly stretched out her hand to carry him off the Kong, and walked to the door with great effort. Lu Lin, who just flew out, ran back like a fly, hugged Lu Sen out, and told Lu Shuer for sure, "It's my father who is back." Lu Shuer also saw it, and it was her father Lu Chonggeng and uncle Lu Changqi who walked in from the gate of the courtyard, and the fourth uncle Lu Chenqi was talking to the fourth uncle Lu Chenqi far away. Lu Changqi went straight to the room as soon as he came back, and when Lu Chonggeng saw his children all running out, he smiled and opened his hands to hug Lu Shuer, who ran to the front. "Suer, are you good at home?" Lu Shuer refused to answer such a childish question, but tilted her head and asked, "Dad, have you and the uncle and fourth uncle found a job? You are so happy, do you think you found it?" Lu Chonggeng grinned happily, stretched out his hand and pressed it on the tip of her nose. "You're a little kid. You have a lot of worries all day long." Someone behind him laughed, "I see Shuer as a ghost. Little money is a ghost." The fourth uncle Lu Chenqi came out from behind and took Lu Shuer over, ready to fly into the air. "Throw too." Lu Shuer screamed in fright, "No, no. Fourth uncle, don't throw me. Still a coward." Lu Chenqi laughed happily. Lu Chonggeng, who had already held her young son in her arms, also disagreed, "Don't throw her, what if you fall?" Lu Gao heard the movement and had already come out, and happened to meet the boss at the door, so he asked, "Have you found a job?" Lu Changqi also grinned, "Mother, I found it. The summer landlord's family has set the spring sowing and autumn harvest next year, we will send 2 people." Before Boss Lu finished speaking, Lu Gao interrupted in surprise, "What? Spring sowing and autumn harvest? What about our land? That's not going to be a tenant for the Xia landlord's family. No, no, no. Absolutely not." Lu Gao's face flushed with anxiety, and he shook his hand vigorously. Seeing that the big brother is stupid, he can't tell, Lu Chenqi hurried over and said to himself with a smile, "Mother, it's not tenants, or renting our labor to work in the fields next year. The landlord's family has just bought 300 mu of fertile land on the Ziliupo side Indiana Xia. There is not enough manpower for the autumn harvest, and there is no place to find tenants now. Even if they are looking for it, I am afraid that they will not be able to get the manpower for a while. Only then did they hire people to work in more than a dozen villages around this place, and give him the spring sowing and autumn harvest next year. There is also a year to slowly find someone." He explained in detail with a smile, "Our brothers discussed it, but we can't go there. We still have land, so we agreed to go to 2 laborers. In our family's land, we will leave 2 people. With Dad, it should be enough. Mother, don't worry, anyway, the child can go to work in the fields, willows. There should be enough manpower, just a few more days than this year. Besides, the work is not to be done now, but to free up the time of the past 2 months, tomorrow, the 4th child and I will find work." Lu Chonggeng also said. Lu Gao nodded after hearing this, "So that's the case, that's fine." Lu Shuer tilted her head and asked, "Xia landlord said it will be settled." Lu Chenqi was about to say it, but when he heard Lu Shuer's question, he immediately smiled and reached out and pressed it on her nose, "It's just you, Alf." The eldest Lu Changqi also smiled, and took out a purse whose original color could not be seen clearly from his arms. "I gave us 1,000 wen as the fixed money, and it has been agreed that next year's wages it's 4,000 words, 2,000 for one person." As he spoke, he gave Lu Gao's purse together. When they were talking, Mrs. Ma had already come out of the room, and stood beside him and listened. At this moment, he saw the boss hand over the purse to Mrs. Lu Gao, and his eyes were red with anxiety. It's just that he didn't dare to speak in front of people, so he could only gao Lu Changqi fiercely. Lu Gao did not expect that he would give 1,000 pennies as a deposit, and was surprised and hurriedly took it. The cushion was really heavy, and the wrinkles on his face that immediately smiled were invisible. Nodding his head happily, "Okay. 4,000 wen is really a lot. 4 taels of silver, oh, the landlord of Xia uses 20 taels of silver to set a labor force, won't you lose money?" Lu Shuer blinked her eyes and thought quickly. Lu Chenqi smiled and said, "How can they lose money? Next year will be the busiest time for the country people, besides, after all, they are looking for people when the farming is busy, who can work for them regardless of their own land." Lu Chonggeng also nodded and said, "Yes, I heard that they are looking for work, and there are many people going, but when I heard that they were working during the busy farming season next year, they left. Most of the time, the housekeeper of the Xia family is also anxious. Originally it was 1,500 wen for one person, but there are very few people who can do it, and it adds up to 2,000 wen little by little." Lu Chenqi nodded and continued, "Yeah, I discussed it with the eldest brother and the second brother, and it is just right to provide 2 labors. We can also take care of our own, and theirs can also be done." Seeing that her mother-in-law went in, Ma slammed Lu Changqi into the kitchen, and before she went in, she heard her scolding in a low voice, "Why did you give your purse to my mother? There's 2 pennies I gave you there." Lu Changqi was pulled in. Lu Chonggeng shook his head and carried Lu Sen into his house. Lu Chenqi also followed with Lu Shuai in his arms. Lu Lin, where are your 3 uncles and 3 aunts? Locked? Your third aunt is seriously ill. When he saw that the door of the third brother was locked, he naturally thought that the condition of the third sister-in-law had suddenly worsened, and he might have gone to the city to see a doctor. Lu Lin immediately explained everything that happened at home today. When it comes to the quarrel between her third aunt and her grandmother, she was vivid and vivid. That's it, I'm not finished, after all, he is still a younger brother. Lu Chonggang did not speak with a dark face, but from the looks of it, if he was at home at that time, he would definitely go up to help the third brother teach the unfilial third brother and sister a lesson. Lu Lin raised his face and looked at his father. Dad, the uncle of the third aunt's family brought a box of silver. Is there really so much silver in the world? Lu Chenqi made a bow at the door. Lu Chonggang shook his head. Dad doesn't know either, but it's not ours, we're not jealous. Lu Lin nodded his head immediately. Yes. I'm not jealous, I just ask. He quickly defended. Lu Shuai pouted. Second brother, father, fourth uncle, we really don't need to be jealous of them. After a few years, our life will definitely be much better than them. We have seen more money than them. Lu Chenqi was immediately happy. Oh. Su'er is small, and his tone is not small. Lu Shuai raised her face and said, let's live our lives diligently and diligently, isn't it better than those who are too lazy to even move? Lu Chonggang was teased and laughed. Don't say it, what my daughter said makes sense. She gave Lu Shuai a heavy kiss on the face. Yes. The brothers chatted and laughed for a while in the room, and went to wash their faces and hands. In the kitchen, Lu Changqi finally came out scratching his head after being scolded. Lu Changqi's eldest daughter, Lu Xiener, went to help Ma Shi cook. After a while, Lu Hong, the little aunt who had saved eggs and insoles from the cellars in the city, also came back and went to pay Lu Gao's account. She suddenly breathed a sigh of relief, thinking about it in his heart. Lu Hong washed her hands and hurriedly went to help her sister-in-law cook. When the old man Lu came back from the outside, the sun began to set. Lu Chonggang saw that his wife and son had not come back, so he was worried and went to find him again. Hands wandering in the courtyard, from time to time to see the way outside the courtyard. As soon as Lu old man entered the door, he was blocked by Lu Gao's house, and told Lu old man what happened today. Ear. The third daughter-in-law is forcing the family to split up like this. Did you know that the third son came to me yesterday and told me that his daughter-in-law was ill and wanted to build a stove in his own house and be a lone fire? What? The old man Liu's voice was buzzing. Why didn't you tell me yesterday? I'm not afraid that you will be angry. Look at it now, I really can't go on. Lu Gao's voice was much lower. Lu Shuai actually looks down on lazy people like the third uncle and aunt. Even if they have some money for a while, they can't guarantee that they will be helped all their lives. Such people should never think about being rich. Besides, being so lazy, I don't know what else to pursue in this world. Do you lie on the Kong every day and eat and wait to die? Anyway, Lu Shuai is a very diligent person in both past and present life. 2 years ago, she was thinking about how to make a fortune, but she was too young to implement it, but she had an idea. A lot of praise, it will start next year. Lu Chonggang came back with the wash basin, followed by he and Lu Shu, and walked into the yard. Ma's meal was finally ready. Seeing he came back, Ma Shi snorted unhappily. He also gave her a blank look. Lu Hong followed behind and was busy setting up meals. The peasant family had to eat before dark to save lamp oil. Now that the weather is cold, the meals are placed in Lu Gao's and Lu Laohan's house. There is one table on the Kong and the next table. Lu Laohan, Lu Gao's and several sons are on the Kong, all the daughter-in-law and Lu Hong. Take the children to eat at this table under the Kong. Generally, the dinner is very simple, a dozen black noodle buns and a plate of pickled vegetables. But I don't know if it was because my grandmother Lu Gao was stimulated by the third daughter-in-law Jie, she actually fried a cabbage with some shredded and minced pork in it. As soon as the chopsticks of the old man Lu picked up the table and stretched them towards the black-faced buns, Ma quickly stretched the chopsticks to the plate of fried cabbage, slammed the chopsticks, and sent them into the bowl of his youngest son Lu Tao. Ma's two eldest are daughters, and the youngest has a son, 2 months earlier than Lu Shuer. Ma was very used to this young son. He and Lu Hong didn't say anything. They were used to Ma's behavior. Willow and Catkin never robbed them. Only Lu Lin was a little greedy. Time to grab a chopstick. The buckwheat noodles in Lu Shuer's bowl were made by Lu Gao's family for Lu Hong alone. Lu Shuer knew that her little arms were short, and she didn't plan to grab the fried cabbage, but Lu Shu and He alone took chopsticks for her, and she ate the noodles. He held a black-faced bun in his hand, opened it and put a chopstick and pickled vegetable in it, then hugged Xiao Liason, fed him noodles with one hand, and held his own bun with the other. The buns were eaten in 2 or 3 bites. What do you say? Old man Lu thought for a while and shook his head. There is no need to look for it tomorrow. The county will go to the city tomorrow to prepare the baby's New Year's things, and your mother will give you money later, so prepare early for the next morning. Don't worry, don't get old and things get expensive again. The head of the family said so, and the brothers nodded in agreement. After dinner, Lu Hong packed up and went to wash the dishes. Lu Gao called He and Ma to him and took out the copper coins that the sons brought back today. Bai Wen handed it to them. This is the money you bought for the new year. I bought some cotton to buy the children's clothes and shoes. Of course, the food and everything are still together, but Lu Gao's family doesn't bother to buy them one by one and leave them to be their mothers. The amount is uncertain. Last year, he gave 400 wen. This year, because of the large amount of money he was looking for, Lu Gao's hand loosened slightly. The whole family sat and talked for a while, then went back to their respective houses. No one mentioned anything about the third child and Jiaxi today, as if there were no 2 of them. He held Xiao Lu Sen with a small head and started bit by bit, returned to the house and put Lu Sen on the bed first, patted him lightly with his hands to coax him to sleep. Lu Chonggeng squatted at the door and smoked dry cigarettes. His father, are you going to the county tomorrow? He asked. Go, it's not like I said, in the future everything will be expensive. Since Dad said to go, hurry up. Take Willow? Why don't you ask Willow to stay to see Suer and Senzi, and take Willow? He said. Lu Chonggeng did not speak for a while. How about bringing Lu Shu along and asking Lu Hong to watch the child for a while? He continued. Lu Shuer entered the house and was about to climb up the Kong. When she heard it, she immediately called out, Father, Mother. I want to go too. Take me with you. He subconsciously objected, No, what are you going to do? I haven't been to the county yet. I'll go and see what's interesting. Also, let's see who is there. Lu Shuer knew that her father was a good talker, so she went to catch at Lu Changgen's arm, who was squatting there, was shaking back and forth. Dad, I'm going, take me with you. I want to go and have a look, I haven't been out yet. Lu Chonggeng just took a couple of puffs, when she was swayed by her daughter and couldn't squat. As soon as she turned her head and was about to speak, she saw the smoke from the dry cigarette holder drifting towards her daughter. Lu Shuer coughed loudly, he hurriedly fanned the cigarette in front of her, and knocked the dry cigarette on the threshold again, and stopped smoking. He smiled and touched Lu Suer's head, Go, or else, will the children go? He picked up Lu Shuer and put it on the Kong while asking Mrs. He. He was obviously worried, but shook his head resolutely, Of course not, we too have 3 children, how can we see it? Willow is also a child, can you see it? Go see? What if you lose one when you run around? Lu Shuer looked at Lu Sen and whispered, Not 3, Mother, you have 4 children. He and Lu Chonggeng, who were discussing, were suddenly amused by her, and he tapped on her little head and smiled angrily, Of course Mother knows that I have 4 children. What do you want to do? You can't go by yourself, and you still want to take Moriko? Can you carry him or hold him? Lu Shuer grabbed his arm again. Mother, I promise not to run around. Ask my brothers to hold my hand, I must follow closely. She turned her head looking at the willow tree. Big brother, can you carry your brother on your back? Willow is only a 7-year-old child, and she wants to go to the county seat. Hearing this, he laughed and scratched his head. Then can you look at me? Lu Shuer asked again. Willow hurriedly puffed out her chest. Of course. I promise not to run around and watch my younger siblings. Lu Chonggeng looked at his son and daughter, and felt a little uncomfortable. He lost his smile and said softly to Mrs. He, if you don't want to call me Mori, I will never leave. Hand, Lu Shu looks at his younger brother and sister and won't run around. He still wanted to object, but her husband had already spoken, so she couldn't refute it. She was looking at Lu Shuer's hope. Mrs. He also hesitated, and nodded angrily on Lu Shuer's forehead. You have a lot of things to do. You said that you are a little girl, what can you do in the county? You are not allowed to see everything when you go there. The last sentence is undoubtedly a promise. Lu Shuer almost jumped up with joy, and agreed loudly with joy, got it. Definitely don't ask for anything. Lu Shu and Lu Lin, who was waiting nervously, also breathed a sigh of relief. The two also smiled and hurriedly went to the back room to sleep. Lu Shuer really hasn't been to the county, and she wants to go to the county not for fun, but also to see what she can do now. The family is so poor, she is also anxious. This is today's dry food. It was too early to be unhappy, and the three brothers and sisters coaxed for a while. Lu Chonggeng swept the yard and went to the village's home to borrow a donkey cart. Mrs. He accompanied Xiao Xiao and Mrs. Lu Gao told him to take 4 children with him. Mr. Lu Gao ate as expected. Surprised, of course he didn't want to, Mrs. He said kind words for a long time, before Mrs. Lu Gao reluctantly agreed. Fengxian County is a small and not small county in Hanzhong Mansion. There were 2 or 3 parking sheds at the entrance, and someone was watching. As long as a penny was needed, Lu Chonggeng naturally parked his car outside the city. Don't want to miss the last episode. Lu Chonggeng held Lu Sen, he held Lu Lin and Lu Shuer's hand, Lu Shu held Lu Shuer's hand outside. The family strolled around the market for a while, although they came to buy there are things, but he's looking at this as expensive, and at a glance that is not cheap, he is not willing to buy anything. I always came out of the market selling meat, vegetables and eggs without buying anything. He walked back to the street where he bought the cloth. He thought back and forth many times in his mind, and finally came here. He bought 10 feet of cotton cloth and spent 80 pennies. Just buy some more cotton cloth, we won't buy anything. You also talked to Lu Chonggeng. Lu Chonggeng nodded with a smile, and suddenly saw a man over there just turning his face, but he knew him. It was Shi Qian who lived in the east of the village. He hurriedly greeted, Brother Shi, are you also coming to the county to go to the fair? Shi Qian also saw him, and nodded hurriedly with a smile, yeah, second brother Lu is also coming to the market? Yo, are you bringing the whole family? He saw a string behind Lu Chonggeng. He stopped and looked at Shi Qian, smiling and nodding. Liashu Liyulan and Lu Shuer also quickly shouted politely, Uncle Shi. The adults spoke, but Lu Shuer saw at a glance that there was a rabbit seller over there. A dozen rabbits were placed in a bamboo basket, and they were still long-haired rabbits. Her eyes lit up, and she shook his hand hurriedly, Mother, let me go, I'll go over there to see the rabbit. He looked down at her, Don't run around. Don't run around, it's right there. Lu Shuer pointed to the other side, he looked at it, it was right next to it, and then Lu Chonggeng and Shi Qian had to talk for a while, then let go. Lu Shuer hurriedly ran over. Willow and Willow hurriedly followed. Little Catkin squatted in front of the basket, looking at the snow-white little rabbit in the basket, Her eyes full of love, it really was a long-haired rabbit, she was not mistaken, she had raised one before. Lu Shuer has been thinking quickly in her heart. Lu Lin stepped forward to take a look, also found it cute, but nothing unusual, came over and stretched out her hand to pull her up. Let's go Shuer, mother called. Lu Shuer couldn't stand up, and her fell hard. Lu Lin wasn't very energetic, and he didn't pull her up after a long time. Lu Shu stretched his head beside him, looked at the rabbit thoughtfully, and then looked at Lu Shuer, who he liked very much. His mouth moved just as he was about to speak. You're leaving, don't look at it. Mister, he came over. Mother. Buy me 2 little bunnies. Lu Shuer immediately asked with a hopeful look on her face. He immediately shook his head, where can I buy which one with spare money? Get up and go. Seeing Lu Shuer not moving, she added, why did you promise your mother when you went out? I want something. I don't want anything, mother, I don't want anything, I just want 2 rabbits. Lu Shuer looked at he-she with a pleading face, and reached out and grabbed her skirt, make a pitiful look. Before Mr. He could speak, there was a laughing Puchi from the side. The 3 of them looked over and saw a young woman standing beside a 5 or 7-year-old boy, who was laughing. When Lu Shuer saw that it was Aunt Shi and Shi Cheng, she hurriedly stood up and called out, Aunt Shi, hello. Lu Shu Liyuan also quickly followed, Aunt Shi. Shi Cheng Niang smiled and nodded, good, and greeted Mrs. He, you are here too. Lu Shuer continued to squat down to look at the rabbit, and when she heard Shi Cheng was still laughing over there, she turned her head and glared at him, and turned her face away angrily. He hurriedly smiled and nodded to the woman, yeah, sister-in-law of the Shi family, just now Chong Geng saw brother Shi over there, I'm still wondering why I didn't see my sister-in-law and Shishan. You guys also started, are you preparing something for the new year? The sister-in-law of the Shi family smiled and nodded, I just came out of that shop. It's not just busy, but I should also buy the things I will use for the new year. Yeah, my family is too, while the farm work is not busy at the moment, hurry up to buy something. By the way, the sister-in-law of the Shi family, it's the matter of the teacher Shuer tying up, I thinking that these few days are not free. He said with a smile, a little embarrassed, and looked at a 12 or 13-year-old girl who was following behind the Shi family's sister-in-law. This little girl is not the daughter of the Shi family's sister-in-law, but the maid of the Shi family. The Shi family is a wealthy family in the village, and there are 3 or 4 servants in the family. The sister-in-law of the Shi family nodded cheerfully and smiled, call Suer here. I've been free these days, when will I teach if I don't teach? He's full face smiled, oh, thank you so much. This craft is not rumored, and we are too thick-skinned. Look at what you said. They are all neighbors, why are you saying these outrageous words? The 2 women chatted, and Willow was not interested in rabbits, so she stood up behind them, staring at her younger brother and sister not to get lost. Lu Shuer saw that her father and Shi Cheng's father were also chatting over there, so she could only continue to squat in front of the little rabbit's basket and wait. There are 2 people squatting beside them, Shishan and Liyuan. Shi Cheng smiled thiefly, why? Do you want to raise rabbits? Lu Shuer's face flushed in a hurry, she turned her face and glared at him, then turned to look at her second brother. Lu Lin is a serious 7-year-old child, with a puzzled look on his face, only to understand after listening to Shi Cheng's words, and exclaimed in surprise, what? Suer, do you want to raise a rabbit? This little rabbit? What are you feeding it? Let's talk about it. Can our family raise such precious things? As soon as he said this, Lu Shuer and Shi Cheng couldn't help but give him a blank look, it's just a rabbit, also called Jingui. Shishan suddenly remembered it, smiled and said in a low voice, I understand. You must have taken a fancy to the 4-leaf clover on the of the small ditch in front of your house. Bar. Wrong, I just saw that piece of alfalfa, the rabbit loves to eat that, I raised rabbits to get rich. What's wrong? Shi Cheng laughed putchy and lowered his voice, there's nothing wrong with that. Humph. Then what are you talking about? Out of the corner of Lu Shue'er's eyes, she saw that her father had come over, and quickly ended the conversation that didn't seem like a child, and looked up. Lu Chonggeng, who was approaching, called out, Father! Buy me 2 rabbits. Lu Lin didn't hear the murmurings that the two of them later lowered their voices, but he heard it in front of him, so he immediately turned his head to face Lu Chonggeng and said loudly, Father, Shue'er thinks rabbits. Lu Chonggeng came over and greeted Shi Cheng Niang with a nod, and handed Lu Sen to Lu Shu to hug, then smiled and squatted beside Lu Shue'er, reached out and patted her head gently. What? Want a rabbit? Lu Shue'er nodded heavily, yes, Dad. Buy me 2, I want 2. She grabbed her father's arm with both hands and shook it back and forth. Shi Cheng squatted beside her and watched her coquettish with her father, smiling. Speaking of which, Lu Chonggeng was more accustomed to children than his daughter-in-law, scratched his head, raised his head and asked the rabbit seller, how much for a pair of rabbits? After all, most of the people who come to this county are the villagers from the surrounding 10 miles and 8 villages, and few have spare money to buy this. But the rabbit seller really wanted to see Lu Shue'er, and the adults seemed to be more distressed about the baby, so they were ready for a long time, seeing the adults finally come to ask the price, busy greeting with a smile, do you want a male and female pair? 500 yuan for a pair. 500. The simple and honest Lu Chonggeng almost sat down on the ground in fright. He cried out, why are rabbits so expensive? How about $50? Do you know how much a pound of good rabbit hair is? Some can be sold for 300 to 400 yuan a pound. And this rabbit hair will grow again after one crop is cut. As long as the rabbit is well cared for, the rabbit fur will it's always been there. This is a business that can make a profit without losing any money. I came from Songjiang Mansion, and I only sold it from a stall in Peach Blossom Town. If you don't believe me, just shop around, there's absolutely no other store. Lu Chonggeng, a simple and honest countryman, only knows that $50 can buy 2 stones of grain. In a good year, you can even buy 3 stones to 3 stones and a half of grain. How could he possibly agree? He shook his head again and again, it's too expensive, it's too expensive. When he stood up, he bent over and wanted to pick Su'er up. Su'er, this rabbit is too expensive, we won't buy it, I'll go home and catch it for you in the mountains. 2 wild rabbits. Lu Shue'er finally ran into someone selling long-haired rabbits. How could she give up? Grabbed Lu Changgen's arm and shook it vigorously. Father, buy me a pair, I want to raise them. I think so. I don't want anything for the new year, Dad, I beg you. Tears welled up as he spoke. Lu Chonggeng still picked her up and coaxed softly, Shue'er obedient, we can't afford this rabbit, Daddy will catch you 2 exactly the same. No, no, I don't want my father to catch it, I want this long-haired rabbit. Lu Shue'er's small body was picked up at once, and she was about to walk away, really anxious and sad now, tears will fall on Lu Changgen's shoulders. Shi Cheng stood up and scratched his head. He really wanted to help with a few words, but he knew that he had no right to interject like an outsider. Lu Lin also stood up, he and his brother Lu Shu all stared at Katkin with wide eyes. As soon as the little Lu Sen saw the cute little rabbit, he immediately screamed and struggled to come down and touch it. Lu Shue'er said to Lu Chonggeng tearfully, Dad, I don't want anything for the new year, don't make me new clothes, just use the money for pulling the fabric to buy rabbits. Lu Chonggeng looked at her daughter with tears in her eyes, she couldn't bear it, and subconsciously muttered, it doesn't take 500 words to pull the fabric. Lu Shu said, Dad, I don't want any new clothes, can I buy them for my sister? Lu Lin nodded when he heard what his brother said, yes, Dad. I don't want any new clothes. Lu Chonggeng felt uncomfortable when he heard this, looking at the two brothers standing in front of him. They were both 7.5, but they were not as tall as Shishan, who was 5 years old. I don't want new clothes. I want a bunny. Lu Sen, who was squatting in front of the basket and touching the bunny's white fur, also shouted loudly. When Lu Chonggeng looked at the tearful Lu Shuer lying on his shoulders again, his face was full of helplessness. You. I'm so used to you. When Lu Shuer heard her father say this, she knew that he relented and agreed, and immediately burst into laughter, struggling to get down to the ground to pick rabbits. Is this easy to feed? How do you serve it? What about a rabbit worth 500 yuan? Of course Lu Chonggeng had to ask clearly. When the rabbit seller saw that they were going to buy it, he was naturally happy, and said with a smile on his face, it's just like the usual domestic rabbits, it's not difficult to serve at all, it's just that the hair grows in time. Shear the rabbit's fur. What should I pay attention to when cutting rabbit fur? Nothing to pay attention to, this rabbit is used to cut rabbit fur. It's uncomfortable not to cut it. Don't worry, it's just like a normal rabbit. When they were talking, Catkins picked rabbits, and Shishan also squatted down and picked them together, looking at the ones who were in good spirits and ears, picked a few, and then chose from here to choose. Turning his head to look at Uncle Lu, he was still concentrating on asking the rabbit seller how to serve the rabbit. Shi Cheng calmly looked at the male and female, and then gave Lu Shuer which two he wanted. Lu Chonggeng finished talking to the rabbit seller, turned his head to see that the children had already picked them up, and you didn't feel relieved to look at them. Seeing that the picks were good, he nodded and got up to go to his. Take money. Here, Shishan saw Lu Chonggeng leaving, so he said to the rabbit seller, let's do it less, 500 yuan is too expensive. Lu Shuer nodded and agreed, yeah, it's too expensive. The rabbit seller listened to the two little babies bargaining for him, and he was stunned before he waved his hand, it's not expensive or expensive. It's not expensive at all, it's already the least. After the baby bargained, she closed her mouth and waited for Lu Chonggeng to bring the money. The adults didn't bargain, they all went to get the money. Seeing that 500 yuan was about to be obtained, he would be stupid if he set the price now. Seeing that the rabbit seller was ignorant, Shishan reached out and pulled Lu Shuer's arm, Suer, let's go, we won't buy it anymore, it's too expensive. Lu Shuer of course knew the strategy, and stood up very cooperatively, yes, it's too expensive, don't buy it. Said and Shishan walked to the side, let's walk forward, maybe there are other fun things. Well, there are chickens in front of you, it's fun, and it's cheap. Shi Cheng also said, and the two walked to the side hand in hand. The willow tree and the willow forest here are all stupid, staring blankly at the Catkins who almost cried just to buy a rabbit and just left. The willow tree stared at the two of them in amazement move. Sure enough, the rabbit seller was in a hurry, isn't it this little girl who is trying to buy a rabbit? If the little girl left, wouldn't the adults just stop buying it? Before Shi Cheng and Lu Shuer walked 2 steps away, he shouted, okay, it's 2 cents cheaper, 498 cents. Shishan turned his head and pouted, are you coaxing me as a child? I often come to the city to play. There is also a shop of my family in the city. Then there are often rabbits and donkeys on West Street. The calf, the other side only sells 450 cents. He lowered his head again and said to Lu Shuer, let's go over there and see, if there is one, buy it there, it's 50 cents cheaper. 50 cents can buy you a dozen small animals. Where's the chicken? Lu Shuer kept nodding as he spoke, she was completely different from the one who had just been grinding adults to buy rabbits. The rabbit seller was stunned. Seeing the clever look on the little boy's face, he had no choice but to nod his head, okay, 450 yuan is only 450 yuan. You two little bastards. Very elf. Shi Cheng and Lu Suer suddenly showed a smile, and when Lu Suer rushed back, she carefully grabbed the 2 rabbits that Shi Cheng had just picked by the back of their necks and held their hips into their arms. Xiao Lu Sen kept smiling away stupidly, and immediately turned around and stretched out his chubby little hands to touch the 2 rabbits in his sister's arms. Shi Cheng laughed, and Willow was looking at Shi Cheng in amazement after he let go of the rabbit selling, and then looked at Su Er and Moriko who were holding the little rabbit deep and deep. He took a breath, as if he had made up his mind. He, who was still chatting with Shi Cheng Niang, knew that Lu Chonggang was going to buy a rabbit. No matter how he said and how to coax, she was holding the rabbit and resolutely refused to let go, and Lu Chonggang also murmured to persuade him, and Shishan's father and mother were standing next to him, and he was embarrassed to be with her husband on the street. Children quarrel, can only pay for it. Lu Shu and Shishan both reminded Lu Chonggang that the rabbit was already 450 wen. Lu Chonggang also gave the 2 children a strange look and took out 450 wen. Shi Cheng's father and mother took Shi Cheng away, and his face was pulled down immediately, and he stretched out his finger and tapped Lu Shueter's forehead. You can really do it. The Catkins did not speak, and hugged the 2 rabbits tightly. The money bought the rabbit, but the Lu family didn't buy anything else, so they drove out of the city to drive back. Lu Shueter was holding 2 snow-white bunnies in her arms, sitting on the rickety bullock cart with pouting. Mrs. He was sitting at the front and was complaining about Lu Chonggang, who was driving the car. You said that you are too used to her, and the 500 wen money was spent by her. I don't even know what to say about you. What's good? Lu Chonggang didn't look back, only the simple and honest laughter could be heard. He turned her head again and said to Lu Shueter, why are you so stubborn? What are you doing buying this thing? Don't you just take it for a while? What if you die? 500 wen, it's a waste of water. Lu Shueter pouted and did not speak. Lu Sen leaned beside her, giggling, and fondly touched the rabbit's back. Brother Lu Shu and Lu Lin sat opposite their sister and brother, and when they saw their mother getting angry, they both bowed their heads deeply and did not dare to make a sound. He complained all the way and returned to Peach Blossom Village. Lu Chonggang went to return the ox cart at the head of the village. He took 4 children into the courtyard, and when he entered the courtyard door, he whispered to Lu Shueter, hurry into the house, don't tell your aunt to see it. Lu Shueter hurriedly nodded, hugged the 2 rabbits tightly, and ran into her house with her head lowered without looking anywhere. I didn't know that she heard the movement outside. Her Aunt Ma Shi had already come out, and at a glance, she saw Xiao Lu Shueter running in with 2 white rabbits. Her eyes immediately became round. All of a sudden, his face turned blue with anger, and he rushed over in 2 big steps and grabbed Lu Shueter's small shoulder, and shouted loudly, what is this? Oh my mother! Father, mother, come out and see. The second child went to the town to buy a gourd for the baby. Before Lu Shueter's grandfather and grandmother came out to see, she slapped her hand, you are a prodigal girl. I can't beat you to death. Lu Shueter desperately wanted to break free, but when she saw the slap blowing down with the wind, she only complained in her heart. He knew that it was not good when he saw Su'er being caught by the sister-in-law, and hurried forward. Faster than her, was a small figure, rushing over to block Su'er in front of him. Ma Shi's slap hit the back of his neck heavily, and there was a crisp pop. Lu Shueter's face turned pale with fright, and was pulled behind by he who ran over, and also pulled behind Willow who was slapped for her sister, madly mad at Ma. He pushed hard and shouted, I used the money to buy clothes for my baby. Our family doesn't want anything during the Chinese New Year. Why do you beat my baby? Ma Shi was pushed back a step, stood firm and shouted, it's not right to use any money. Why can't I beat the money for messing about? What are you 2 and 2 people used to do with babies? What does it look like? You are reluctant to discipline, and I will discipline you as an auntie. Lu Sen saw her brother and sister being beaten, and was so frightened that she burst into tears. Lu Lin also came to stand beside her brother and glared at the aunt. He shivered in anger, keeping the children behind him. From the house on the east, Lu Gao saw the chaos in the yard and shouted, "What are you crazy about, eldest daughter-in-law? The money I gave to the second family, come to me and call, what are you doing?" Ma scrambled to grab the rabbit in Lu Shueter's hand. Lu Shueter desperately bent over to protect the rabbit in his arms. He was not easy to mess with. Seeing the horse-she's hand grabbed it, opened it with all his strength, and pushed her viciously, causing Ma to stumble back. If Mr. He hadn't been afraid to walk away, Mrs. Ma would take the opportunity to beat his own child. He would have rushed to the kitchen to find a kitchen knife. Lu Shu turned around and stretched out his arms to protect his sister. Lu Lin also took advantage of the chaos and bit Ma Shi's hand that was stretched out in front of him. Ma's didn't catch the rabbit, so he pointed at the family and ran towards Lu Gao's mother. "Did you see that this family partnered to beat me? Protect the prodigal girl. Baby!" He shouted and ran to Lu Gao's, clapped his hands on his legs and cried, "This day can't be over. The poor family raises a prodigal girl, and they lose all their money. How are things going? My son and my daughter can't even eat, and the second child's family still has money to buy gourds." Lu Gao's ears hurt because of the noise, and he was also very dissatisfied with he's taking the money to buy rabbits for his children. "Do you know the surname? Your Willow Lin trousers are a lot shorter, and the ankles are exposed, so you can spend the money to buy the baby's material to buy the gourd? Why don't you feel bad for the baby?" Lu Shueter knew that when she returned home, her mother would definitely bear the consequences for her willfulness, so she didn't say a word when she was complained by her mother on the road. Now I heard her say this. A small breast is about to say that he insisted on buying it, but his brother Lu Shu has already said loudly, "Milk. I insisted on buying it. My mother and my father can't do anything about it." You must know that Lu Shu is the eldest grandson of Lu Laohan's family, and his status is not ordinary. He swallowed the words of the lesson again, snorted and stopped talking. Ma's quit, and cried loudly, "This family is a prodigal. How much money can this family deserve? I don't care. Mother, I won't give an explanation today. I can't live any longer." Lu Gao groaned even more when she heard this. What did the eldest daughter-in-law think? Could she not know? "I just want to split up. Just like the third daughter-in-law who is too lazy to look like she has no bones." In recent years, the eldest daughter-in-law often quarrels on various topics. The purpose is to separate the family. Ma's urgent desire to split up the family does not need to be married to Jia Shishao, who just entered the house. After so many years, Lu Gao has seen through the quarrels again and again. He was still heartbroken by the slap in the palm of the willow tree just now, and she was shaking with anger and wiping her tears, trying to go to the kitchen. "Hold back!" Lu Sen, who was crying in horror at the door just now, rushed towards he, who hurriedly picked him up and wiped his tears while shedding his own tears. Two teenage girls came out from the smaller house in the west, Ma's daughters. Seeing their mother crying over there, they came over and pulled an arm to persuade. Ma Shi even cried heartbreakingly, "My eldest daughter is 12, and I haven't told anyone yet. Why? It's just because I don't have money. People dislike my daughter. I hate my daughter who can't afford a dowry." She patted her chest with a bang 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 sound. "We are the eldest in this family, we have suffered the most, we have done the most work, and we have suffered the most. Four are all pulled by me." An old man's voice came from the gate of the courtyard. "What are you yelling? Who suffers too much? When did my son get pulled over? Why don't I know?" Ma's cries were choked up immediately. When the head of the family, Old Man Lu, came back, Ma was being rude, and he didn't dare to make too much trouble in front of his father-in-law. The old man Lu came back with Lu Changqi, Lu Chenqi, and the second child Lu Chonggeng. Lu Chonggeng went to return the ox cart, and when he was walking back, he happened to meet his father, eldest brother, and fourth brother who had just returned from the fields. "Before entering the courtyard, I heard the howl of my sister-in-law, and I suddenly remembered that it might be a conflict with my own family, so I hurriedly took a look. Sure enough, I saw the children hugging together, and the mother of the child stood in front of the children with her young son in her arms, wiping tears. Lu Changgang hurried over and asked in a low voice, "What's wrong?" Lu Changqi saw that his daughter-in-law was making trouble again. His eyes were wrong, he squinted at her, as if he really wanted to go up and punch her. The old man Lu, with the cotton robe on his shoulders, walked in with his hands behind his back. Without looking at the people in the courtyard, he walked directly into his room. Ma was relieved that he was going to make a big fuss today, and when he saw it, he stabbed his neck and shouted, "Dad! Look at the second family. Mother gave some money to tell them to go. She is very good to buy clothes for the baby. She bought 2 rabbits for the prodigal girl. How can there be such a prodigal? My family's Xiao can't even eat egg custard, they still have money to buy rabbits. Their baby doesn't need clothes, save the money and buy 2 eggs for my baby." He said angrily, "Why do you beat my baby? I spent the New Year's money my mother gave to our family. If you beat a 5-year-old baby, how can you go down hard hand? You two are reluctant to teach the prodigal daughter a lesson, I will teach it. Why can't I teach you a lesson when I am an aunt? See what you and your wife are used to doing? I tell you, the prodigal is not good. Dad! How can we rural people afford such a prodigal girl? Only then did they start to harm their family, and in the next 2 years they will harm our Lao Lu family. How can we go on like this? It's all right, don't yell anymore, I know what you want to say." The old man Lu still entered the room and said at the door, "The boss, the second, the old man. Come in for." Here, Lu Lin has already told his father what happened just now. When Lu Changgang heard that his eldest son was beaten, his face turned ashen. In the blink of an eye, I stared at the elder sister-in-law, and then looked at the back of Willow's neck, and the expression on his face was even more ugly. There is a very obvious slap print on the back of the Willow's neck. It took so much effort to hit a child. He heard the choked Mr. He say, this was hit in Suer's face, and it was blocked by the willow tree. At that time, Lu Chang'an's hands were shaking. His face was as heavy as the bottom of a pot, his hands were clenched into fists. He turned and walked into the old man Liu's house, and when he passed by Ma's side, he said fiercely, "My baby, I will teach myself a lesson, if sister-in-law dares to dare again in the future. If you beat my baby, I will beat your Lu Tao how you do it. Go in with a black face." The eldest, Lu Changqi, has a rather sluggish temperament. Usually, the Ma family is rambunctious and noisy. As long as it is not a big deal, he usually doesn't care. You can't quarrel all the time, can you? But today, as the boss, he can't just sit back and watch, let alone the second brother said this in front of himself. Lu Changqi also stared at Ma Shi with a dark face, and followed him in. Ma Shi was not afraid of Lu Changqi at all, and snorted while sticking to his neck. Lao Si Liu Changshi also took a look at the slap print on the back of the willow tree's neck, took a breath and called Ma Shi, "Sister-in-law. Why are you so cruel to a child? Willow is not your nephew. Auntie is going to hit my sister with a slap. I was blocked by my brother." Lu Lin immediately shouted. Lu Chenqi's face also changed, "If this slap hits Xiao Suer." He rushed to Ma's in a few steps and said loudly, "You want to split up and talk to your father and mother. You're just not. If it wasn't for her sister-in-law, he really wanted to say that you're not a human being. Okay, come in quickly." The boss Lu Changqi shouted from the room. Lu Chenqi went in bitterly. As soon as the old man Lu entered the room, he got on the Kong, took off the cigarette bag and pot from his trousers pocket, knocked on the head of the Kong, and took out a large cigarette from the hanging cigarette bag and put it in. He lit the smoke pot, took a sip, and then looked at the sons standing below. "Last year, I said about the separation of the family. At that time, I felt that the third and the fourth did not talk about their relatives, and it was not appropriate to separate the family. Look at it now, some of these people are really guarding our two old people and can't get through. Dad! What are you talking about, saying that my son has no face to be the boss? Lu Changqi said immediately with a slight dissatisfaction. You can't control your own mother-in-law, you beat your two girls all day long and scream, I can't control it, and now I'm putting my hand on my brother's baby, this is me, you can't leave it alone. The old man Lu looked at Lu Changqi seriously. Lu Chonggeng stood in front of the Kong, shivering with anger. Dad, don't worry about it, I'll take care of that vicious mother-in-law when I go back. If I can't, I'll chop her hands off. Let's see how she beats the baby in the future. Lu Changqi said angrily. Lu Chenqi sat beside the Kong and nodded heavily when he heard the elder brother say this. The old man Lu waved his hand, lessons are lessons, this mother-in-law beats the baby so hard. However, I have also thought about the separation of the family, it is really not suitable for the whole family to gather together. It's over, it's going to be like this, all day long, your relatives are going to be enemies. You have to let the neighbors see jokes, so it's better to have a good morning. Fourth, you go to your uncle Lichen now, and then go and invite your second master. Dad! Lu Changqi shouted, the separation had already been said, he did not object, but today's hurried separation was entirely because of his own wife, he can't help but object to this. He is the boss of the family after all, and he can't divide the family for his own sake. He can't afford this reputation. In the future, people in the village will say that it was because the eldest daughter-in-law beat his nephew and nephew that the Lao Lu family split up. How can he keep his head up in the future? The old man Lu was very clear, and waved his hand, don't worry, I won't mention today's matter. The fourth brother also hesitated for a moment, Dad, the third brother and the third sister-in-law have gone back to her parents' house, do you still have to wait for the third brother to come back? The old man Lu shook his head, if I ask you to go and invite, go and invite. It's not just splitting up today, but when you come, you have to discuss a charter. Do you think splitting up is so easy? Lao Siliuchenchi then understood, and nodded hurriedly. Lu Gao kept patting on the edge of the Kong with the Kong duster, and said angrily, the outsiders seem to have no separation, but look at your baby and the second child's family. Does the baby wear the same clothes? What is the difference between this and the separation of the family? You are the boss. I just thought about my father's livid face when he found out that his mother-in-law was hitting the child. He felt that he didn't say anything. Today, this incident will affect the majesty of his boss, so he turned around and said, I want to go back to my house to clean up my mother-in-law. I just took a step and was stopped by the old man Lu, what are you doing? Go back and beat the mother-in-law and scream, your second master and your uncle are here and we say we split up, they still do you know what's going on? Just stay with me. Lu Chongqi squatted at the door. He led the children back to the house, went to find medicinal wine and rubbed the neck of the willow tree, and the catkins put the long-haired rabbit on the ground, so she hurriedly washed her hands, came over to climb on the Kong and stretched out her hand rubbing him, seeing the big red handprint on her brother's neck, Lu Shuer was heartbroken and sad, but just didn't want to cry, and the tears kept falling like golden beans. Lu Shu lowered his head and felt a pair of small hands rubbing against the back of his neck. He looked up at Lu Shuer with tears in his eyes, and hurriedly smiled, it's okay, it doesn't hurt, brother. Don't move. He said, his eyes were still red, and his expression was light. Lu Shuer took a peek at her mother, and felt even more uncomfortable. Mother must have known that there would be such a thing when she came back, so she objected to buying this rabbit, but she really didn't buy a rabbit for fun. She spent the whole family buying clothes for the new year, and even caused her eldest brother to be slapped. She felt so uncomfortable. Lu Sen was also lying on his eldest brother's back, pouting and rubbing his chubby hand on his neck. Lu Shu immediately turned around and hugged Lu Sen, still crying. Boys can't cry if they can't move, it's a shame. Lu Sen pouted even higher. He looked at the crying daughter and the young son who was stunned. She couldn't bear it. She pulled Lu Shu's clothes back, and said to Lu Suer, "It's all right, it's all right. Hurry up and serve your precious rabbit. I can tell you, don't let it go after 3 or 2 days of enthusiasm. Take good care of those 2 ancestors." There were tears on his face, but he was already rolling on the Kong with laughter. He finally smiled when he saw his youngest son rolling around on the Kong. Lu Shui really misses those 2 rabbits, so she hurriedly got off the Kong, went to the back room. This is the room where his 2 brothers slept, saw the 2 rabbits and found at the corner huddled up, so she went out of the house to find a home for the little rabbit to weed. As soon as she arrived at the door, she saw Li Zheng came in with a cigarette pipe in her mouth, and she hurriedly shouted, "Master!" Li Chen is also surnamed Lu, and he and the Lu family are relatives of the 5 clans. He smiled and nodded, "Be good." He went to the old man Liu's house. The eldest daughter Lu Xiener on the aunt's side came out. Seeing Lu Suer, she didn't speak, and went to the kitchen to bring a basin of water out. Lu Shuer searched around the house for a long time, but couldn't find anything suitable for the rabbit's nest. The northwest side is full of loess, and there are very few trees, not to mention bamboo and willow branches that are suitable for making baskets. The catkins returned without success, thinking in my heart, I can only ask my father to make a rabbit nest out of wood. She went to the small ditch at the gate of the courtyard to pick alfalfa grass. This small ditch snaked past several gates and gathered into the ditch in the mountain. Fortunately, with this little ditch, the surrounding area of their house is a little green, otherwise there will be dirt everywhere. It didn't take a while. Lu Lin came to him, "Suer, mother told you to go back, don't run around." "Well, I'll pick some grass for the rabbit to eat, and I'll be back in a while," Lu Shuer said without raising her head. Lu Lin also came to help her. Lu Shuer continued to bend over to pick grass. She didn't care about this eldest sister who didn't like words very much, and she didn't know what she was thinking all day long. Anyway, she always looked at people with such strange eyes. There are 2 big daughters on the aunt's side, named Lu Xiener and Lu Yuner, and another boy is Lu Tao, who is the same age as Suer. Lu Xiener is actually less than 12 years old. In rural areas, the age is counted as a false age, and it has to be counted as 1 year old. Lu Xiener is actually 10 years old, or a half-year-old girl. There is no need to rush to talk about marriage. The aunt always used her as an excuse to make noise, but it was actually for the purpose of separating the family. The aunt's maiden brother went out to do business a few years ago and made a small fortune, and gave some money to the aunt. Split? The old man Lu and Lu Gao knew it well, but the money was subsidized by their parents' family, and they didn't have the face to ask Ma to take it out, so they turned a blind eye. In the past 2 years, Mrs. Ma has seen that Lu Xiener has grown, and in a few years, it is time to say kiss. Mrs. Ma is afraid that the family will not be separated by then she just wants to give her daughter buying a thicker dowry. There are still aunts on it, and they can't be too good. So the one who caused the most trouble of separation in the past 2 years was Ma's family. The eldest, Lu Changqi, of course also knows the situation of his family. He and Ma have the same idea and hope to separate the family. But he is the eldest after all, and the words of family separation cannot come out of his mouth. Moreover, Lu Changqi still has the responsibility of being the boss. He was also angry at the more and more mischief of the Ma family for the separation of the family in the past 2 years, and he also beat the Ma family. The one who is at home is himself, whatever you say is counted. If you earn money, you will get more and he will be less, and it will be too much trouble to make noise. The old man Lu also knows this principle, so he has been thinking about splitting up the family for the past 2 years. Not only that, last year, the 3rd child also became a kiss, and there is also a 4th and a little girl, so this does not affect now. Looking at the old folks, we really can't live together, it's better to split up. In addition to listening to Lu Gao's and the virtues of his 3 daughters-in-law yesterday, the old man Lu made up his mind completely this time. They are both off. It's better to split up the house as soon as possible and go to each other. Lu Lin saw the eldest brother Lu Shu was cleaning the pigsty with a rake, and he was busy giving the grass pick to Katkin, so he went to help. Lu Shuer walked into the house, and came out of the aunt's house, a little girl of 7 or 8 years old, with 2 pigtails upside down, wearing a pink long jacket with a pair of fronts, and a pair of beautiful embroidered shoes with flowers. The clothes on her body contrasted with the black cotton padded jacket and black cotton padded shoes on Lu Shuer's body, which was extremely stark. It's like one is a little fairy daughter and the other is a little mud monkey. When the little girl saw the Catkins, she immediately called out, "Stop! Where is your rabbit? Bring me one." This is Ma's second daughter Lu Yuner. Lu Shuer ignored her and continued to walk inside. Lu Yuner ran over and opened her hand to block her way, shouting, "You didn't hear me! Give me a rabbit! You prodigal girl!" Although Lu Shuer is too lazy to care about her, she can't let a girl with a big fart bully her. She immediately stares at her neck. "It's the money grandma gave my family for the new year. What for you? Are you unreasonable?" Lu Yuner stared and screamed, "You are unreasonable! You have a big face, and you have spent the whole family's money and you are stubborn. That money was earned by my father's hard work. Hurry up and hand over a rabbit. Or be careful, I'll beat you." She waved her fist-grasping hand. She was 8 years old and half a head taller than Lu Shuer. This advantage was obvious. Lu Shuer rolled her eyes. She really is like a mother and a daughter. "I can't beat your mother's big waist and round waist, not even your little brat." Although she is still a few years younger, Lu Shuer still knows about hitting a woman and pulling her hair. Looking at the 2 braids on both sides of Lu Yuner's little head, Lu Shuer made up her mind that if she dared to hit herself, she would pull her braids and not let go. "I have to give her a haircut. Always tell her to know what pain is." Although Lu Yuner is often beaten by her mother, Ma's family, but Ma's most of the time is to play for her grandfather and grandma. She taught Lu Yuner a long time ago. It is good to applaud when the neighbors are disturbed by the noise. So Lu Shuer estimates that Lu Yuner has never been beaten before. At a young age, her acting skills have been practiced. Lu Yuner saw that she was still stuck in the neck, and immediately waved her hand over, imitating her mother's movements as usual. "I think you dare." Liashu and Li Yulan over there heard the noise and came early. Liashu rushed to Lu Shuer and stared at Lu Yuner. "You dare to move me, sister? Try it." Lu Lin also rushed over and gave her a fist. "I'll beat you down." As soon as Lu Yuner saw the 2 of them approaching, her mouth flattened, and she suddenly howled loudly, "Mother! Mother, come and see! Willow Li Yulan is going to hit me! Mother!" Ma, she just ran out of this room, and the boss in the main room over there ran out like a lit cannonball, roaring with a blue face, "Go back to the room! What's going on?" Ma sees that Lu Changqi is completely blown away. After seeing old man Lu calling her husband and brothers, she knew that it might be to discuss the separation of the family, which was her purpose, but there was really no need to continue making trouble, and she was afraid that if she made trouble again, it would provoke anger. "It's old man Lu, let's do it again." That had the opposite effect, so he came over and dragged Lu Yuner's arm back, and scolded Lu Shuer, "Prodigal daughter." The willow tree and the willow forest are both angry and their eyes are red, and Lu Shuer in turn comforts them, "Don't be angry, I won't be able to live with them for a few days, brother, go get busy." The willow and the willow forest continued to clean the pig pen. Lu Shuer walked into the house, and heard someone shouting from behind, "Prodigal girl, prodigal girl." She turned her head and saw a small head exposed at the door of Ma's house. She was shouting to herself. As soon as she saw her, she immediately shrank back. It was Ma's youngest son, Lu Tao. Lu Shuer didn't take it seriously, and continued to enter the house to feed the rabbits. When she saw her little aunt Lu Hong talking to her mother, when she saw her come in, Lu Hong laughed and said, "Shuer, You buy what kind of rabbit? Why didn't I see it? Lu Shuer pointed to the back room, it's inside. Suer is well raised and eats rabbit meat. Lu Hong said with a smile. Lu Shuer knew that the aunt was trying to comfort herself, but she didn't get to the point. She thought that she, a 5-year-old child, must buy rabbits to eat rabbit meat. Lu Shuer didn't say much, just smiled. He asked with a sullen face, Suer, was Yuner arguing with you outside just now? Lu Shuer hurriedly smiled, it's okay, she's not sensible. These words made the sullen he-she and Lu Hong laugh. Lu Hong smiled and said, you are 5 years old, she is 8 years old, you conversely say that she is ignorant. Lu Shuer grinned, those who are unreasonable are ignorant. Immediately thinking of the auntie, she stuck her tongue out and went into the back room. Lu Hong's laughter came from behind, second sister-in-law, don't say it, what Shuer said really makes sense. Don't be accustomed to her anymore, let her be proud of it. This is because we are too used to it, and this happened today. Tell me, I just borrowed a flower, why did it make such a fuss? Lu Hong looked at Mrs. and persuaded in a low voice, second sister-in-law, you don't need to pay attention to that side. Well, she's just that temper. Who doesn't know what she's thinking, what the whole family knows, she still makes trouble all day long, making my elder brother shameless. Forget it, Dad has made up his mind this time, and she can't make trouble. A few days. The catkins put the alfalfa in front of the rabbit, and sure enough, the 2 little rabbits got close and sniffed, and immediately ate it. When I was in love, I was interested in 4-leaf clover and lavender, and I checked a lot of information. 4-leaf clover is also called alfalfa grass, and rabbits love to eat it. At that time, because of looking for information on alfalfa grass, I accidentally saw some raising rabbits. In fact, the rabbit is a kind of animal that is very easy to feed. Especially this kind of long-haired rabbit, the fur can be cut off and sold for money, and the rabbit meat can be eaten. Lu Shuer heard from Shishan that there were long-haired rabbits in the county town. At that time, she had already thought about raising rabbits, but it was too small. She was afraid that she would not be able to handle it. Because they think it is difficult to support. The lowest plateau in the northwest has few trees, aridity, no mountains, but many deep ditches. Moreover, there is nothing produced in these ditches, unlike the northeast side, where the mountains are full of treasures, and unlike the south side, where the rain is plentiful, just digging, mushrooms and bamboo shoots are always full of food. The living environment in such a place is actually very bad. In the countryside, the family can't eat enough and wear warm clothes, let alone get sick. It would be good to have a doctor in every mile and 8 townships. It is said that people in the clan want to come forward, even if the neighbors are not used to it, they will complain to Lichhan. In a place like this, people can't feed, let alone develop any breeding industry. It is estimated that no one thinks about this. At most, poor families will raise some chickens, 1 or 2 pigs. Chickens usually lay eggs and sell them for money. The Shishan family is the real farmer, but they only started to pick them up in the second half of this year. I heard that they bought 3 or 4 cows, and Lu Shuer has been thinking about going to see them. The catkins made a circle with a small stool and surrounded the 2 rabbits. The rabbits live in this way for the time being. I will go out tomorrow and gather some grass to make a soft nest. Made a wooden basket. I went to find another broken tile, washed it, scooped some hot water from the pot on the stove, and let it dry for a while for the rabbit to drink. I don't know how to discuss the family separation, but the old man Lu has been discussing with several sons every day for the past 2 days. Ma's eyes widened and he wanted to eavesdrop. Lu Gao was caught and scolded. 3 days later, Lu Chengui and Ji returned. When the 2 entered the door, they were still sneaking. Without saying hello, they hurriedly unlocked the door and entered their house. Mrs. Ma happened to be standing in the courtyard. Of course, they had already guessed that they had taken something from their parents' house, and looked at the large package on Lu Chengui's back. Var! It was as big as a large chopping board, and it looked quite heavy. Ma, she deliberately shouted, the third child and the third daughter-in-law are back. Mother! Come out and see, you are carrying a big burden. Jia glared at Ma sternly. Lu Gao heard the call, but she didn't go forward. Seeing Jia's defensive expression, she was tired and only shouted, Old third! Come back when you come back, your father I have something to do with you. Regia just said, don't give anything. Just didn't say anything. Dare to give it a try. Lu Chengui went to the house with this idea in mind. When he saw that his brother and brother were all there, he was surprised. Then he heard that it was the separation of the family, and he was relieved. Of course, he nodded. He is also eager to split up. On the second day after the third child came back, Li Zheng, several masters in the clan and the only surviving master all came to Lu Laohan's house and looked at the family. The first is the field, the other is the dwelling, and the other is the grain. Lu Laohan's land is only 8 acres of medium-sized fields, which are divided among 4 brothers, and a share is reserved for Lu Laohan. The brothers all hope to leave more land for their father, so the old man Lu divided 2 acres, and the other 4 brothers each 1.5 acres. Just live with the old man. The eldest Lu Changqi also insisted on living in the old house. He is the eldest and should live by his parents' side and serve them filially. Split up. You should find another place to live, but it's not too far away, and you are afraid that you won't be able to take care of it in a village. The boss and the old man Lu had already said what he said, and Li Zheng nodded his head and said, just say what the boss said. Your father can understand it, and outsiders have nothing to say. Still have to go out, as soon as we come it's because the population of the family is gradually increasing, and it can't live there anymore, and secondly, as your father said, the family is separated, and if you don't leave, what is the separation of the family? Lu Changqi nodded and did not speak. When the family is rich, they build a house on the original, and the old house can no longer live. The family has given houses in 3 places, basically all around the old house, not far from it. This is also the basic rule, the old man is still there, the children and grandchildren can't be far away too far. The 3 brothers didn't have much to choose from, and they politely divided the places where they lived.